John's Gospel, chapter 2. Last week we saw Jesus begin his earthly ministry. He came to bring people to God, ordinary people like you and me. He came to bring sinners to God, sinners like you and me. That's what people are, sinners. They've all violated the law of God, and they need to be rescued from the consequences of that. To know God, you have to know Jesus Christ, because he's the rescuer. As Jesus said in his great high priestly prayer, when we get to chapter 17, he prayed, Father, you have given the Son authority over all flesh to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is life eternal, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. 5 men have begun to follow him, or 6 if you think that the unnamed disciple, who's obviously John, brought his brother James. And they are beginning to learn about him, to know God and his Son, Jesus Christ. Now, if you grew up in Sunday school, these events that we're going to look at all through this gospel are, well, probably kind of old hat. We've read about them, we've heard about them over and over, and frankly, the wonder is probably gone. But that's not how it was for these men. For these guys, every day is a revelation. Every new event brought marvels that left them scratching their heads saying, what in the world is going on? As we open chapter 2, John consults his diary and says, on the 3rd day, that's the 3rd day after Philip brought Nathanael to Jesus. Remember, this is history, carefully recorded by an eyewitness. Verse 1. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. The village of Cana was just a little ways away from Nazareth, and I think it's likely that one or both of the couple were relatives. Now that would explain why Jesus' mother is so well informed about the meal preparations. I can imagine her arriving and going right to the kitchen and saying, okay, what can I do? Give me a knife, I'll start chopping the vegetables. Chuck Swindoll gives a little background on weddings of that time and culture. Weddings in those days were different than they are today in the West. Marriages in the ancient Near East were arranged by parents. A contract was prepared. Vows were spoken in the synagogue. Tokens were exchanged. And then the man and woman returned to their own respective homes. Although legally considered married, they lived apart during a betrothal period, which lasted no less than 2 months and could be as long as a year. At the end of the waiting period, the groom would take to the streets with his friends, usually at night, in a torch-lit procession from his home to the bride's, in a grand parade accompanied by pomp and color and singing. After speeches of goodwill and blessings pronounced over the couple, the groom took his bride home, where family and friends feasted for as long as a week. The groom's family were expected to provide enough food and drink for everyone for however long the feast lasted. If you thought paying for a wedding reception was expensive today. Well, verse 2. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. John the Baptizer did not go to parties. His was a very serious ministry. Jesus' ministry was different. He accepted invitations to social events. The Word became flesh and dwelt temporarily among us. He took part in being human. He entered into the normal experiences of life, and when he took part, the experience was better. Dr. Brisby said, wise is the couple who invite Jesus to their wedding. And I will add this, wise is the family who makes Jesus a welcome guest in their home every day of their lives. Life is better when Jesus is there, and you know it, and you're glad because of it. On our vacation at the end of May, we went to a pizza parlor. By the way, BC Pizza in St. Ignace is really good. You're passing through. And as we always do, we vowed to thank the Lord for what we ate, and the manager came up and said, it's good to see people actually pray before they eat. When Jesus is your unseen guest, people take note, especially if you do more than just vow to say grace before meals. Not only was Jesus invited, but his disciples were too. I think that was probably a last-minute invite. After all, Jesus has only had disciples for just a few days. Now, Nathanael, you find out this later in the gospel, Nathanael was from Cana. He may have been invited, and he may have pointed out to the family, now, you've invited Jesus' family, but Jesus has got 5 guys that are traveling with him. So, quick invite. And maybe that was what upset some carefully laid plans. Have you ever planned for some event and realized too late that you estimated way too low? And if this was a small wedding for a poor family, providing for 5 extra guys for a week is a huge problem. Verse 3, when the wine ran out. Now, to this day, in the East, hospitality is considered a sacred responsibility. The whole community looked to the groom's family to be proper hosts and provide for the meal. And if they failed, it would be such a breach of etiquette that the bride's family could actually bring legal action against them. Think of the shame that they would feel. And that is such a picture of the human race, desperately trying to keep up appearances and achieve acceptability before other people, all the time worrying that we won't be good enough and putting on a pretense that we are. But here's the thing. It really doesn't matter in the long run what people think. What matters is what God thinks. Do people have a reason to be ashamed before God? We saw in Romans 3, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Do you know what our foreparents, Adam and Eve, experienced the moment they violated God's command and took what he told them not to? Shame. They went their own way and they disobeyed God. And they could not hide it. They were naked before God, and God was coming. That is not just the position of this family who are going to be on the hot seat in the eyes of the community. Far more profoundly, it is the position of every man and woman who is going to stand before God and give account for all the ways in which they have fallen short of his requirements. And men and women who will stand before God will not have any acceptable excuse to offer. They will not be able to say, well, it's not my fault 5 extra guys showed up and kept me from doing what I knew was right. People are in trouble unless there is someone who can rescue them from shame. And there he is. And he came to the wedding. Verse 3 again. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Why did she bring this to Jesus? Now you remember that when Jesus was conceived without the joining of man and woman by the power of the Holy Spirit, Mary was a virgin until after Jesus was born. That's a tough spot to be in. She first had to endure the suspicion of her betrothed husband until the angel of the Lord filled him in on what was going on. And then they both had to endure the suspicion of the community that they had violated the betrothal separation. And for years, for 30 years, Mary had patiently waited for the day when Jesus would be revealed to everyone as the Messiah. And she would be vindicated for her faith and obedience. There are many Psalms where David cries out for vindication against false accusations. And I'm sure that Mary read those with great understanding. But Jesus is going to disappoint her, at least for now. God often disappoints us. You've experienced that, haven't you? But part of growing in the Lord is learning that our Heavenly Father knows what He's doing at all times, in all places, in all circumstances. And if He disappoints us, it's because He has something planned for us down the road that is far better than anything we're hoping and asking for now. Wait on the Lord, David says. Be of good courage, and He shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Verse 4, and Jesus said to her, Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. Now, the first thing we have to do is understand the way people talked in that culture. To address a lady as woman was proper and polite. That was the way to do it. In our culture, we might say, ma'am. And the phrase translated, what does this have to do with me, is literally, what to me and to you. Now, that was a phrase that people used in those days when they politely declined to get involved. Now, he's not saying to her, I refuse to do anything. That's obvious because he did something. What he's saying is, this will not accomplish what you think it will. It will not reveal my greatness to the world. It will not take away the burden of suspicion you've had to bear all these years. You're just going to have to trust me and my Father. And I'll throw this out as just kind of a sidelight. For centuries, many Christians or professing Christians have said, you want to be sure your prayer is answered? You ask Mary, because Jesus won't refuse his mother. They actually said that. That is so unbiblical. You know, for his whole life, Mary has thought of him as her son. And he is. But now she needs to take the step of understanding and faith and see him not just as her son, but as her Lord. And if she doesn't do this, then the more she sees him suffer, the more she's going to suffer. And she takes the step of faith and turns it all over to him to do as he wills. Verse 5, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. You know, that's not bad. If only more Christians would say that and practice it themselves. Do whatever he tells you. Now, Jesus had to disappoint his mother, but he's not going to leave the groom's family to face the shame of their failure. He's going to do something for them because he cares about them, just like he cares about you and me. And he's going to do it on God's timetable. The hour had not come for the world to see the glory of his messiahship, but it was time for his disciples to begin to learn just who he was. And he puts on a very private demonstration. Verse 6. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. That's a lot of water. Now, why were the jars there? Well, that's explained in Mark chapter 7, verse 3. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, observing the traditions of the elders. The law of Moses required cleanliness. That's one of the reasons the Jews avoid many of the diseases of the surrounding Gentiles. And the scribes and the Pharisees tended to take the law to extremes, so it took a lot of water. And there's a perfect opportunity to give the disciples a look at who he was. Verse 7, Jesus said to the disciples, filled the jars with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. It gives you a clue as to how obedient servants had to be back in those days. And you know, as we will see in the next verse, that the water they drew out became wine. Chuck Swindoll gives a little more background here. He says, there's an interesting historical background to this. Turning water into wine was, at this time in history, a cliched, sleight of hand parlor trick. Today it would be like pulling a rabbit out of a top hat. Conjurers in pagan temples used special pitchers with hidden chambers to create the illusion of pouring either water or wine at will. I see Jesus revealing his sense of humor in choosing to solve the family's problem by actually doing what others could merely simulate. He left no room for trickery, while he stood back, perhaps even while reclining at table in the other room. The servants handled the jars, fetched the water, and drew the sample. Then, somewhere between the jars and the wedding coordinator, the miraculous transformation took place. And it was really good wine. You know, what Jesus provides is always good, because the will of God is always better than our desires. Verse 8. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine, which you have kept the good wine until now. Wine varies in quality, and the usual practice was, as he said, to serve the best first, and later, as people's palates are satiated, they won't so much notice the quality of the lesser wine. Now I'm going to stop and kick a sleeping dog here, okay? Some have translated this as, when people have gotten drunk. I don't think that's an accurate translation. For one thing, the scripture always condemns drunkenness. It's what people do in Satan's dark domain in order to kill the pain of life. And the question has been asked, did Jesus, I remember a young person asking this, did Jesus whip up 160 gallons of booze so people could party at the point of drunkenness? No, he did not. For one thing, okay, some historical background here. It's a historical fact that the Jews, the Greeks, and the Romans all drank their wine mixed with water. There's much written about in writings that have been preserved from those days. Will Durant, in his massive History of Western Civilization, gives the formula: 3 parts of water to 2 parts of wine. You know, if you did that by USDA rules, wine would not be considered that. Wine would not be considered an alcoholic beverage. Now, I kicked that sleeping dog because a generation ago, many conservative Christians were taught that drinking any alcohol at all by a Christian was sinful. It's like going to movies or playing cards. Oh. And that was adding to the scriptures something that was not there, like the Pharisees did. I remember the church I grew up in, a Christian couple moved to our town of Langsburg, and they had a dream of owning a grocery store, and they bought one. Karen worked for him as a teenager for a while. But our church constitution barred them from membership because their grocery store sold alcohol. And as a young Christian, that just did not seem right to me, because they loved the Lord. They wanted to serve him in their local church. Well, the Bible does not condemn the use of wine. It condemns drunkenness. So, by giving the historical background, am I saying that Christians must go back to the ancient custom and mix water with their wine? No, I'm not. I am saying that, as Paul said, whether we eat or drink or whatever we do all to the glory of God. And that was what Jesus did here. In displaying his glory, he glorified his Father. And that was the point. Verse 11. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. In his prologue, John says, we have seen his glory, glory of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. We mentioned that there are 3 Greek words in the New Testament that are used for miracles. One word means power, because it takes power to do a real miracle. Another means wonder, because real miracles make people say, what in the world happened? And the third means a sign, because God's miracles mean something. They point to something. And that's the word that John always uses in his gospel whenever he records one of Jesus' miracles. Every miracle Jesus performed pointed to who he was. It was a sign. In his purpose statement at the end of the gospel, John says in chapter 20, verse 31, these signs are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. He came to rescue sinners. Instead of the judgment of God, they can receive life if they will believe in him. And these guys are going to proclaim that message. But if they proclaim it, they must believe it themselves. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, they don't have it all yet. They will get more and more as they see the signs and hear his words. But they're starting to get it. They're not just believing miracles took place. That was obvious. They are beginning to believe in him. And after they've seen all the signs and heard all the words, John says, we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from his Father. And that glory, that display of who he was full of grace and truth. This is the first sign. John records 7 of them. What does this sign mean? What did it point to? Well, it pointed to him. Who is he? He's the Son of God, who was with God and was God. He's the Creator. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made, not one thing that was made. He made the earth. He made the plants that grow on it. Psalm 104 says he causes the grass to grow for the livestock, and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. Jesus does all of that. He's God. He's the Creator. But the sign points to something else. Jesus is not only the Creator, he's the Savior. He not only provides our physical needs, he's the only one who can rescue us from shame. Because shame is coming for everyone. Years later, John says, then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. Why did they flee? Same reason Adam and Eve fled. But like Adam and Eve, no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before the throne, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books according to their deeds. Only Jesus can rescue from that. As Peter said, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. That is what the sign points to. Follow the signs for the time.